Greetings from Mississippi once again, folks, and a happy Father's Day to all of the dads out there. Chalk up another missed holiday at home with my family. I celebrated and honored the two men that were my earthly fathers and remember the many lessons they imparted to me during their, what's in my opinion, too short of a time here on this planet. I cherish the title the Lord allows me to have because of my baby girl. Well, not so much a baby anymore. She's in her 30s now. But it is still a title that I have because of her and for God, because of God's will, for which I'm extremely grateful for. As I stated in my social media post about Father's Day, if your earthly father is still with us, cherish that time with him that you still have. Now, for this past week down here in the deep South, let me tell you, it was a very hot and muggy week out in the field coaching these teams. The forecast for this coming week isn't much better either. It was great reconnecting with some of the people I worked with the last time I was down this way. I also got to work with some new faces this time as well. As I have said in the past, these guys out here in the oil patch are some of the hardest working Americans that I have ever met. They also perform extremely physical work in some of the harshest climates that you can imagine. These weather conditions are no joke, and these guys are out in them busting their butts from sun up to sundown, all to support America's energy sector, despite the attacks on it from our own national government. Granted, they are working to provide for themselves and their families, but their work contributes to America's efforts to become energy independent. My hat is off to these guys every day. There's been some great news and momentum building in the arena of my campaign, which we'll discuss later. And of course, there's some shenanigans, which I would expect no less from the supporters of the establishment and the establishment candidate, which of course led me to title this week's show, The Establishment and the Communists. Their methods of attaining political power are often different, but the results are always the same. When they are in power, our liberty suffers. So let's get the disclaimer out of the way right now. The following content is approved by Larry Linton for TN12, candidate for the GOP nomination for Tennessee House of Representatives, District 12. Larry Linton, Treasurer. Now let's get on with this week's episode of the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast, where I'll talk about how our liberty is threatened by both the establishment and the communists, not only in our nation's capital, but also in our state capital and at the local level. So let's take a stand in the arena together again this week, folks, and get on with the show. Welcome to the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. On this show, we will discuss the assaults on our liberty by the very institution we the people created to secure our liberty. We will also compare and contrast the actions of people in leadership positions to the servant leadership that is needed to protect our God-given, constitutionally protected rights. Additionally, we will break down the many lies that elected and unelected officials in government and media spin every day in order to secure for themselves positions of power and influence that are antithetical to the system of government our founding fathers created and passed down to us. Your host on this program is Larry Linton, a 30-year veteran of the United States Navy who also runs his own leadership consulting company. He is also a candidate for the Republican Party's nomination to represent Tennessee's House District 12, which includes Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Pittman Center, Weirs Valley, Seymour, and parts of Sevierville, and most of Sevier County. So here is your host, Larry Linton. Again, good morning, folks. Well, it was not so much of a whirlwind week this week as my final week in Tennessee was. I have pretty much settled into my work routine down here in Mississippi. I wake up every morning around 3 a.m., spend an hour or so in the hotel gym, which is mostly on the treadmill. Then I hit the shower and map out the team that I'll be working with for that day. These teams are spread out throughout the western half of Mississippi and the eastern part of Louisiana. Once I pick a crew to work with, based upon the guidance of the client's superintendent of this area, I look up their location and plug it into this app I use to map out the well sites. Then I hop into the company truck and start driving. The hotel I am staying at in Pearl, Mississippi, it is pretty central to all of these locations. And then it'll take me anywhere between 90 minutes to 2 hours to get to the location. I usually depart the hotel no later than 4:45 in the morning to ensure that I'm on the well site by the time the team begins their morning meetings at 7 every day. Normally, I'm at the well site by 6:30 to do some engagement with the guys on the location before we get down to business. Then it's a full day of on-site coaching, relationship building, and mentoring before I load the company truck back up and hit the road. And then I get back to my hotel room about 6 o'clock each night. It does make for a long day with a lot of windshield time, but the day is jam-packed with conversations and coaching, and the hours seem to pass by very quickly. These teams have taken this new safety and leadership system fully on board and are making great strides to fully incorporate it into their work culture. Outside of the actual coaching and mentoring, I would say the relationship building is the best part. Getting to know these guys on a personal level is really a reward by itself. The similarities between the sailors I worked with for 30 years and these oil field workers, they're too numerous to list, which is really what makes this job so enjoyable. Helping to build winning, successful, and safely operating teams, it's a great job. What's that old Mark Twain saying? Find a job you enjoy doing and you'll never have to work a day in your life. Well, that's how I see this consulting business. I really enjoy doing this, and it doesn't really seem like work. Part of the reason why I'm telling you all this is because this past week has been filled with phone calls, texts, and emails, as well as social media post notifications from the people back in House District 12 in Tennessee. I mean, a lot of them. But since these locations I am at are often in the middle of nowhere and away from any cell towers, I do not get these notifications until I'm back in the truck and on the way back to the hotel in the evening. So if you've been trying to reach me throughout the week and I do not respond right away, there's your answer. I do try to answer each notification, text, voicemail, and email once I get back to the room, but they are piling up and I do not get to each of them received that day. As a matter of fact, on Saturday, I reached out to somebody that had contacted me on Friday, and we spent an hour and 36 minutes on the phone together. I learned a lot from this man who has been a lifelong resident of Sevier County. He has worked around and with just about everybody in the body politic in this county for decades now. In essence, and I'm using this term figuratively in case of any low IQ people or three-letter agencies that are listening to or watching this episode, in essence, this gentleman knows where all the bodies are buried, so to speak. One thing in particular we discussed was this new fee, and don't forget this part, this new county government office that was started to do the fire safety inspections on the short-term rental properties here in Sevier County. The information he provided was completely eye-opening and dovetails nicely in with an open records request that I submitted months ago about the purchases over the course of 20 years of certain types of vehicles by the Sevier County government. Very little data was provided, and the information provided only went back as far as November of 2022, which is odd. Given that I know that the specific type of vehicles purchased that I wanted information on have been purchased quite regularly for more years than just the information that I was provided with. The response I got back from the Sevier County Records Office was that this was all the information available, or all the records responsive to my request. That's odd, don't you think? Now, the dollar amount spent on these nine, yes, just 9 vehicles in the records responsive to my request, remember, it was for 20 years, it has totaled more than $1.1 million. Now, that money, of course, comes from the taxpayers in the county, right? But as I said, more than 9 of these types of vehicles have been purchased by the Sevier County government since 2004, don't you think? What vehicles, you ask? Well, I'm referring to vehicles purchased by the Sevier County Fire Department. Prior to 2022, do you think everybody in the department were driving around 2002 model year and earlier vehicles, including the fire trucks? Of course not. But those 9 vehicles purchased in a span of only 15 months sure have cost a lot of money. I'm sure the chairman of the budget committee of the Sevier County Commission would know more about this, wouldn't he? After all, this county commissioner has served on the commission for more than 20 years. He's served in the fire department and is also a fire truck salesman. Weird how this is all tied together, isn't it? Maybe, just maybe, the residents of Sevier County could request a forensic audit of the Sevier County budget or submit open record requests detailing exactly how much they spend on certain items or pay certain people or just how they run their accounting practices. Maybe somebody could request an audit trail of just how these new fire safety inspection fees for the short-term rentals, how they are accounted for. More importantly, were the proper processes followed in establishing a whole new department within the government of Sevier County. Another individual has told me that Sevier County did not follow the state rules and regulations when standing up this new department. There was not a feasibility study conducted, nor was there a plan submitted to the state or detailing how the funding would work, et cetera, et cetera. Also, by standing up this new department, there were plenty of new positions created that are also paid for by the taxpayers. This whole thing has the smell of corruption, don't you think? Especially with somebody that has really close ties to the fire department, who also serves on the county commission. Maybe he's a person that is also running in the election to be the Republican Party nominee to represent House District 12 in the Tennessee General Assembly. Things that make you go, right? The County Commission Good Old Boy Network needs a really hard look at, don't you think? That was the gist of just one, or actually two, of the conversations with a couple of residents here in the Sevier County this past week. It points to a topic that I discuss quite frequently on this program: voter apathy. For so long now, the people that serve in elected office, not only here in this district, but all across the state and across the nation, get away with so much malfeasance and misfeasance because they know they will not face any repercussions at the ballot box. The citizens do not participate in their self-governance at all anymore, and it is giving all of these establishment types, these good old boys, it's giving them all a sense of invulnerability. So when the fire chief gets a brand new vehicle 2 years in a row, nobody questions it. When a citizen submits an open record request and it's missing a comma or a punctuation mark of any type, the government official that is paid with our tax dollars, they will do their best to provide only records that do not expose shenanigans. And they tell the citizen that these were all the records that were responsive to their request because of grammar. They understand the context of what is being asked for, but they can't do it. They won't do it. The citizens that are seeking to exercise their constitutionally protected oversight of government, we have to think of new and expansive ways to write requests in a manner that will allow no wiggle room for the shenanigans. I ask you folks, is this the type of government we want to govern us? Are these the type of people we want to elevate to the state level or even the national level? Don't we already have enough of those establishment types working in Nashville right now? Just like the communists, the establishment is not concerned with securing the people's liberty, which is the primary function of government. They are only concerned with power. The power to block or circumvent citizen oversight. The power to impose taxes and fees upon the citizens to fuel their power. The methods the establishment used as compared to those the communists used may differ only a little, but as I've said in the past, the results are always the same. The people's liberty is eroded and their sweat equity is robbed from them. I said these two groups' methods differ a little, but sometimes they're exactly the same. I'll discuss that in a bit in the next segment, as well as have detail some more conversations that I had this past week that tell me I'm on the right track or over the right target in this campaign. Remember, you always catch the most flack when you're right over the target. So with that, we'll be back in a bit. Stick with me after this brief break. All right, folks, I close out the last segment by mentioning that you catch the most flack when you're right over the target, which leads me to another conversation that I had with somebody claiming to live in House District 12 last week. This person first started out by commenting on one of my social media posts. He made a claim that he attempted to call me several weeks ago and I didn't return his call, which I found hard to believe. So I messaged him and gave him my personal cell phone number. And we made arrangements to have a conversation in the evening after I returned to my hotel room. But there was something about that initial comment that kicked off my spidey senses, if you know what I mean. I've been pretty accurate when I read some of these replies and posts on either my webpage or my social media pages that people put up. About 99% of the time, I feel that this person is just a troll or a friend of the opposition or something similar. What do you think the first thing that I did before making contact with him on the phone? Well, I looked up his name on the House District 12 voting rolls. Turns out his name was nowhere to be found there, which was odd because he mentioned that as a voter and being very active in politics, in addition to specifically mentioning that he spoke with my main opponent on the phone for 45 minutes, he made sure to mention that he did not agree with everything my opponent stood for, but at least that opponent made time to speak with this man that was missing from the voting rolls. He also said that any candidate that didn't speak with or return calls from a potential constituent did not deserve their vote. Anyway, that was the gist of his post. And like I said, I could not find him on the voter rolls and thought something was suspicious. I messaged him my cell phone number and we made contact. Now, during the phone call, he seemed very interested in why I was challenging this main opponent. You know the one. He's campaigning like Biden in his basement, not taking questions from the public. Odd that he only talks to this young man and nobody else, and only on the phone where there is no record of this conversation. This young man also stated he was a friend of the current incumbent and knew that I had challenged him for the seat as an independent candidate in 2022. To an outsider, they may have seemed like very valid questions about my positions, but again, my spidey senses were tingling. After talking about the incumbents, bad non-conservative voting history, and why I believe my main opponent in this race will just become another carbon copy lapdog for leadership, as long as it solidifies his position and enriches him, much like his service on the county commission for 2+ decades has. I steered the questioning to why I couldn't find him on the voter rolls. Well, that's when the tap shoes broke out. He mentioned in his original post about being active in politics, as well as on the phone, me and mentioning that he worked for the campaign of State Senator Becky Massey. You know her, the paragon of trans publicanism up in Knox County. That too was another indicator of what this guy was up to. Also, that he mentioned he was a friend, or maybe an associate, I don't remember, a friend or associate of Dale Carr. Again, I asked him why I couldn't find him on the voter rolls. He tried explaining how he was only 20 years old and missed voting because he was out of the county attending college. Now, remember, keep in mind, he stated he was active in politics and even worked for an elected official's campaign. Granted, it was for a state senator's whose district isn't part of Sevier County at all, but the red lights and the sirens started going off, if you know what I mean. Active in politics, 20 years old, worked with State Senator Becky Massey, an establishment trans Republican, if there ever was one, and didn't vote because he was away at college. Now, the intelligent, active in politics voter knows that even though Tennessee does not have mail in voting, we do have absentee ballots available to voters in Tennessee. And 2 of the 14 or so valid reasons to be granted permission to vote by absentee are as follows. 1, you will be outside the county where you are registered during the early voting period and all day on election day. And 2, you or your spouse are a full-time student in an accredited college or university outside the county where you're registered. Knowing this, and based upon his questions, his lack of knowledge on conservative issues and voting records, as well as his spirited defense of the incumbent and his endorsement of my main opponent, this guy was an obvious plant to try and stir up opposition to myself by posting that I was unresponsive to questions. which the listeners to this program, as well as the followers on social media, they all know that to be a complete falsehood. His comments appeared on my social media page after I called out the other candidate for the GOP nomination for his failure to accept an invitation to two public events where the voters could ask him questions. My opinion on this young man was completely solidified after I responded to his post on my social media page asking him to publicly retract his original statement now that we had a conversation on the phone. Well, he just deleted the post and slinked away. Some people close to me say that I shouldn't engage with some of these more obvious plants, and they may be right, but I don't see a downside. What I say to them is the same things that I say publicly through this platform, on my website, as well as in my social media posts. That is what the establishment and the communists do not do. They can't do it. Well, more so the establishment. They are not very consistent in their messages. They are prolific liars. The commies, well, they are quite upfront with you that they want big government and less individual, constitutionally protected, God-given rights for the citizens, and that they will work actively to strip the people of them. This whole incident just goes to show you how the methods differ between the commies and the establishment, but the results are the same. Of course, there are the occasional full-blown commies that will comment on one of my social media advertisements or social media posts, and I'll engage with them in some back and forth for just a bit. It's fun. Again, some people close to me tell me that I shouldn't do that either. I have to remind these people that tell me that I'm not engaging with the commies to try and change their mind. I do it for the other people that are listening or reading the back and forth. For some people that are not sure where they stand, these debates might provide them with some information they were unaware of. For others that are too afraid to engage with liberals and commies out of fear of being canceled, it serves as an example of how there is really no downside to not backing down to the liberals, commies, and crazies. In fact, the more you mock them publicly, the better. People, especially those on the left, cannot stand to be mocked in public, and they will eventually retreat out of fear of public ridicule. After all, it is a tactic they have been quite successful at using against conservatives for a very long time now. So we have to use the same tactics against them. Why? Well, it works. Now, that was just the bad stuff that happened last week. There are some very high points as well, like the people letting me know that they are seeing my signs go up around the county. Oh, that reminds me. Another tactic that the establishment uses is to remove or steal campaign signs of their opponents. Some of mine have already gone missing around the county. It's typical stuff. It happened when I ran in 2022, and I fully expect it to happen more this time around. It's just a sign or an indicator of the small minds that fully establish or fully support the establishment candidate. These are the people that are completely comfortable with the slow erosion of their freedoms that comes from supporting these good old boys that have been ruining our county for so long now. It just appears that that's normal. Anyway, there have also been a lot of new supporters that have reached out to me and are volunteering to help the campaign in any way they can. I'm grateful for their assistance. And, frankly, I'm humbled by it for sure. I also received word from Tennessee Right to Life that I was one of the two candidates that meet their pro-life requirements, and they are informing the voters that they can feel confident voting for either one of us. It's not an endorsement yet, but it will be once I win the primary. There will be other news about liberty-loving endorsements and support coming here soon that I'll let you all know about once it becomes quote-unquote official. But based upon my interactions this past week, we can be sure of two things. The establishment and their communists can always be trusted to, one, rob us of our sweat equity, and two, erode our constitutionally protected God-given rights. Through subterfuge like the establishment prefers, or through outright actions like the commies engage in. So now, following a short break, we'll close out this week's show with wisdom from God's word and my closing thoughts as well. Stay tuned and we'll be right back. Thank you once again to all the loyal followers of the show and to the new audience members as well. This week's wisdom from God's word comes to us from 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? After recently returning from the footsteps of Paul pilgrimage my wife and I took in May, I have a deeper understanding of these letters that Paul wrote to these churches. Paul chose the city of Corinth to spread the gospel for some very strategic reasons. The city of Corinth was a major gateway to a huge portion of the Roman Empire at the time he was there. Corinth was also a city with a very sordid history. Establishing an early Christian church there had to be a monumental task. Keeping it going in such a sordid city was equally monumental. The corruption and debauchery were well-known attributes of Corinth, and in this letter, he was encouraging the early church there not to backslide or become yoked again with their lawlessness. They were to be salt and light, meant to shine in that place of darkness, much as we are all called to be today. And just like Corinth of old, it seems that the lawlessness and corruption have taken deep roots here in Sevier County. We are not meant to be equally yoked with it. Just how do we separate ourselves from it now? Well, we ensure that we vote them out and replace them with true servant leaders. The selfish good old boys have had it made for far too long now. We also must not elevate one of them to the state level government. As I mentioned many times in previous shows, the voters here in House District 12, we can be the proverbial shot heard around the state by demonstrating that all governing power is inherent in the people. We need to take it back from the elected representatives that will do the bidding of corporations and lobbyists that have been governing us for too long now. We can each do our part to save Tennessee from not only the loud and screeching voices of the commies and the woke crowd, but we can also save Tennessee by taking it back from the backroom dealing establishment politicians, the ones that are only in it for themselves. The good old boys, the ones that have sold our liberty to the highest bidder to enrich themselves and entrench themselves in their positions of power and control. Early voting starts in less than 30 days here in Tennessee. Be sure and check your voter registration status. I've provided the links on many of my social media posts. Get your neighbors and your friends to do the same. Then show up in force at the polls. Once again, I'm asking the voters here in House District 12 to take a stand in the arena with me during this primary election. Together, we can work to put government back in its constitutionally limited box and secure the liberty of the people. Until next week, Reveille, it's time to wake up.